When the gavel slammed down, ending the most high-profile divorce case New York had seen in a decade, the entire courtroom held its breath, waiting for a scream. The gallery expected a scene, a breakdown, or a plea for mercy. But Evelyn Sinclair didn't cry. She simply stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked out in a silence so absolute it felt like a weapon. The tabloids called it a crushing defeat. But they were wrong. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the quiet before the kill. The wood of the defense table was cold under Evelyn's fingertips. It was a distinctive kind of cold, the chill of polished mahogany in a room over-conditioned to keep the sweat of liars from staining their silk collars. Judge Anthony Graves adjusted his spectacles, the fluorescent lights gleaming off the lenses, hiding his eyes. He didn't look at Evelyn. He hadn't looked at her properly since the trial began 3 weeks ago. He looked, instead, at the man sitting at the opposing table. Richard Sterling. Richard sat with the relaxed posture of a man who had checked the score before the game even started. He was wearing the navy bespoke suit Evelyn had picked out for him in Milan 3 years ago, back when she thought his ambition was a shared dream and not a weapon he was sharpening to use against her. He whispered something to his lead counsel, a shark named Simon Kincaid, and a small, smug smile touched the corner of his mouth. In the matter of Sterling v. Sterling, Judge Graves's voice boomed, a hollow sound that seemed to suck the air out of the room. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Richard Sterling, on all counts regarding the prenuptial validity and the infidelity clause. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery behind Evelyn. It was a sound made of reporters, socialites, and former friends who had come to watch the execution. Evelyn's own lawyer, a court-appointed exhausted man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled perpetually of stale coffee and defeat, slumped in his chair. He didn't reach out to comfort her. He knew, just as Evelyn knew, that he had been outmatched from day one, or perhaps just paid to lose. The defendant, Evelyn Sinclair, the judge continued, stripping her of her married name with a tone of disdain, is hereby ordered to vacate the property at 420 Park Avenue by noon tomorrow. Furthermore, due to the breach of the morality clause as evidenced by the photographs, she is denied spousal support and must pay legal fees for both parties. The photographs, the doctored, grainy images of her entering a hotel room with a man she had never met, a man who Richard had likely hired. It was a frame job so clumsy it was insulting, yet in Judge Graves's court it was treated like gospel. Evelyn felt a physical blow to her chest, a cavern opening up where her heart used to be. She was leaving this marriage with less than zero. Richard wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her. He was ensuring she would be destitute, humiliated, and branded a cheater in every paper from the Post to the Times. "Ms. Sinclair," the judge said, finally looking at her, "do you have anything to say?" The room went dead silent. The court stenographer paused, fingers hovering over the keys. Richard turned fully toward her, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. He wanted her to beg. He wanted her to scream that it was a lie, to make a scene that would validate his claims that she was unstable, hysterical, unfit. Evelyn stood up. Her legs felt like lead, but her spine was steel. She looked at the judge, a man who had likely found a very heavy envelope in his locker at the country club that morning. She looked at Simon Kincaid, the shark who had butchered her character. And finally, she looked at Richard. She saw the expectation in his eyes. "Break," he was thinking. "Break so I can win completely." Evelyn closed her mouth. She picked up her cheap leather purse, the only one she hadn't sold yet to pay Henderson. She smoothed the front of her charcoal skirt. She said nothing. She turned her back on the bench. "Miss Sinclair!" the judge barked, offended by the lack of submission. "You are not dismissed." Evelyn kept walking. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom loomed ahead. The bailiff, confused by her sheer momentum, stepped aside. She pushed the doors open and stepped out of the sterile cold of the courtroom and into the blinding flash of the hallway. It was a frenzy. "Evelyn! Evelyn, is it true? Did you sleep with the trainer? How does it feel to be homeless, Mrs. Sterling? Look this way! Give us a tear!" The cameramen jostled for position, thrusting lenses into her face like weapons. Microphones knocked against her shoulder. The questions were jagged glass, designed to cut. Evelyn fixed her eyes on the exit sign at the end of the corridor. She locked her jaw. She didn't run. Running was an admission of guilt. She walked with the same slow, deliberate cadence she had used when walking down the aisle toward Richard 5 years ago. She saw a face in the crowd she recognized, Beatrix Calloway, a woman who had drunk champagne at Evelyn's birthday parties for years. Beatrix was whispering to a reporter, pointing at Evelyn's shoes, laughing. The betrayal was absolute. The circle was closed. Evelyn reached the revolving doors and pushed out into the humid Manhattan afternoon. The noise of the city hit her. Taxis honking, sirens wailing, the indifference of millions of people who didn't care that her life had just ended. She hailed a cab, her hand trembling only once she was safely behind the glass. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing her through the rear-view mirror. He recognized her. Her face had been on the cover of the tabloids for a month. Evelyn stared out the window as the skyline of the city she used to rule blurred by. She had $400 in her checking account. She had a suitcase of clothes at a motel in Queens. And she had a secret that Richard Sterling, for all his money and spies, had overlooked. "Just drive," she whispered, breaking her silence for the first time. "Drive north." She wasn't just leaving the court. She was leaving the life of Evelyn Sterling behind. But as the skyline receded, a cold, hard resolve settled in her gut. Richard thought he had buried her. But he forgot that you have to bury a seed for it to grow. She wasn't done. 3 months later. The rain in Seattle was different from the rain in New York. In New York, rain was an event. It caused traffic. It ruined blowouts. It sent people scurrying. In Seattle, the rain was just a permanent filter over the world, a grey static that dampened everything, including hope. Evelyn, now going by her middle name, Claire, wiped down the counter of Sal's diner with a rag that smelled of bleach and old grease. Her hands, once manicured and soft from lotion that cost $300 an ounce, were now chapped and red. Her fingernails were short. She wore no rings. "Table 4 needs a refill, Claire," Sal grunted from the grill. He was a good man, roughly the shape of a beer keg, who didn't ask questions when she applied for the job with no references, and a nervous tick in her eye. "Coming," she said, her voice raspy. She hadn't spoken much in 3 months. She went to work. She went to her 300-square-foot basement apartment. She slept, she repeated. The silence she had adopted in the courtroom had become her lifestyle. She didn't own a TV. She didn't look at the internet. She didn't want to know if Richard had married his mistress yet. The bell above the diner door jingled. It wasn't the lunch rush. It was 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. The diner was empty, except for Old Man Miller nursing a pie in the corner. The man who walked in didn't belong here. That was immediately obvious. He wore a trench coat that was tailored, not bought off the rack. His shoes were Italian leather, unspotted by the mud outside. He was tall, severe, with silver hair swept back and eyes that scanned the room with the precision of a tactical laser. He ignored the "Please wait to be seated" sign and walked straight to the counter where Evelyn stood. Evelyn froze. Had Richard found her? Was this a process server? Another lawsuit? The man placed a briefcase on the sticky counter. He didn't sit. "Evelyn Sinclair," he said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn gripped the rag tighter. "You have the wrong person. My name is Claire." The man allowed a faint, humorless smile to touch his lips. "We both know that isn't true. And frankly, Ms. Sinclair, you are terrible at hiding. Your social security number triggered an alert the moment you rented that basement in Ballard." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around for an exit. "Who are you? Did Richard send you?" "Richard Sterling is a pedestrian bore with a god complex," the man said, his tone dripping with aristocratic boredom. "I do not work for Mr. Sterling. In fact, my employer finds Mr. Sterling to be distasteful." Evelyn paused. "Then who?" The man reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a subpoena. He pulled out an envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and made of heavy cardstock. There was no stamp, just her name, Evelyn Sinclair, handwritten in fountain pen ink, an aggressive, jagged script. "My name is Walter Bishop. I am the Chief of Staff for Arthur Penhaligon." The name landed like a stone in the quiet diner. Arthur Penhaligon, the tech recluse, the man who had patented the base code for half the internet in the 90s and then vanished from the public eye. He was rumored to be worth $50 billion, maybe more. He was also rumored to be mad, living in a fortress somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, completely cut off from society. "Penhaligon," Evelyn frowned. "Why would Arthur Penhaligon know who I am?" "Mr. Penhaligon is an avid reader of the news," Bishop said. "He watched your trial. He found the verdict mathematically improbable." Evelyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Validation. "He has a proposition for you," Bishop continued. He slid the envelope across the counter. "He is in need of an archivist, someone to manage his private library and correspondence. The position requires discretion, intelligence, and a total lack of ties to the outside world. Since Mr. Sterling has so efficiently severed all your ties for you, you are the perfect candidate." Evelyn stared at the envelope. "I'm not a librarian. I was a socialite. I ran charities." "You have a degree in art history from Columbia that you never used," Bishop corrected. "And you maintained the detailed financial ledgers of the Sterling Foundation for 5 years, keeping your husband out of tax prison, though he never gave you credit for it. Mr. Penhaligon knows your skills, Ms. Sinclair. He values competence." Evelyn looked up, shocked. How did they know about the ledgers? That was the one thing she had never told anyone. "Open it," Bishop commanded softly. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and tore open the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I saw you leave the court. You didn't scream. I need that kind of silence. Come to the Obsidian Point. AP." Below the note was a check, a cashier's check. Evelyn looked at the number. $50,000. "This is just for the interview," Bishop said, watching her eyes. "If you accept the position, the salary is $2 million per annum, plus room and board at the estate." $2 million. It was enough to rebuild, enough to hire a real lawyer, enough to fight back. But nothing in life was free. Richard had taught her that. "What's the catch?" Evelyn asked, her eyes narrowing. "Why me? There are thousands of archivists." Bishop leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Mr. Penhaligon doesn't trust archivists. He trusts victims. He trusts people who have seen the face of the devil and didn't blink. He believes you, and he share a common enemy. Richard, Bigger than Richard, Bishop said enigmatically. He tapped his watch. The car is outside. You have 10 minutes to decide. If you say no, I walk out. The check is voided, and you continue wiping tables until you die of boredom or poverty. Evelyn looked at Sal, who was scraping grease off the grill. She looked at the rain streaking the window. Then she looked at the check. She untied her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. "I need to get my coat," Evelyn said. Bishop nodded, satisfied. "Don't bother packing, Ms. Sinclair. We will provide a wardrobe. The past stays in the basement." 10 minutes later, the patrons of Sal's diner watched as the quiet waitress named Claire got into a black Maybach with tinted windows and vanished into the grey mist of the afternoon. She was going to the Obsidian Point. She was entering the world of Arthur Penhaligon. And for the first time in 3 months, Evelyn Sinclair wasn't afraid. She was curious. Because if Arthur Penhaligon hated Richard Sterling, then Arthur Penhaligon was already her best friend. The drive took 3 hours. They left the grey sprawl of Seattle behind, the car eating up the miles of wet asphalt as they headed deeper into the Olympic Peninsula. The dense fir trees closed in on the highway, creating a tunnel of emerald and shadow. Inside the Maybach, the silence was absolute. It was a hermetically sealed capsule of wealth. The leather seats smelled of cedar and conditioner, a scent that triggered a violent memory in Evelyn's mind. The smell of Richard's Bentley, the car he had driven the night he told her he wanted a trial separation while parked outside a charity gala. She pushed the memory down. She was good at that now. She was a vault. Walter Bishop didn't speak. He sat in the front passenger seat, reviewing documents on a tablet with a privacy screen. Evelyn watched the back of his head, noting the military precision of his haircut. He was a gatekeeper, a man carved out of granite, and he had given her no further instructions since the diner. Eventually, the trees thinned, giving way to the jagged, violent coastline of the Pacific. The ocean here wasn't the polite, sparkling blue of the Hamptons beaches Evelyn used to frequent. It was dark, churning, and angry. Grey waves smashed against black rocks, sending plumes of spray high into the mist. "We are approaching the perimeter," the driver announced. His voice was the first sound in 2 hours. The car slowed. They weren't pulling up to a gate. They were pulling up to a checkpoint. A heavy steel barrier blocked the road, flanked by a small guardhouse made of reinforced concrete. 2 men in dark rain gear stepped out. They weren't wearing the uniforms of a private security firm. They wore no insignias at all. They carried rifles slung across their chests with a casual familiarity that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. Bishop lowered the window 2 inches. He didn't say a word. He simply held up his hand, revealing a signet ring on his pinky finger. The guard nodded, tapped a keypad, and the steel barrier began to retract with a low, hydraulic hum. "Is this a house or a prison?" Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. Bishop turned slightly, his eyes catching hers in the rearview mirror. For the world outside, it is a fortress to keep them out. For Mr. Penhaligon, it is a sanctuary. Whether it becomes a prison for you, Ms. Sinclair, depends entirely on your discretion. The car surged forward, climbing a winding, treacherous road that hugged the cliffside. And then, Obsidian Point revealed itself. It was an architectural impossibility. The house didn't look built. It looked like it had been violently thrust out of the earth. It was a series of cantilevered slabs of black concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass, hanging precariously over the churning ocean below. It was sharp, angular, and aggressive. There were no manicured lawns, no flower beds, just black rock, grey sky, and the house that looked like a weapon aimed at the horizon. The car stopped beneath a massive overhang that shielded them from the driving rain. "Leave your bag," Bishop said as he opened his door. It will be taken to your quarters. Follow me." Evelyn stepped out. The air here was different, thinner, colder, and sharp with the taste of salt and ozone. She followed Bishop toward the massive front door, which was made of a single sheet of oxidized copper. It swung open silently before they even reached it. The interior of Obsidian Point was vast. The foyer was a cavern of polished slate floors and shadows. The lighting was minimal, hidden in recesses, casting long, dramatic streaks of amber light across the walls. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum for things that should not be touched. "Mr. Penhaligon has 3 rules," Bishop said, his voice echoing slightly in the immense space. He stopped and turned to face her. 1. You never enter the West Wing without a direct invitation. The biometric scanners will lock the doors and security will be alerted immediately. Evelyn nodded. "Understood." 2, Bishop continued, holding up a second finger. "You do not speak to the press. You do not speak to your old friends. You do not post on social media. You are a ghost. If you are discovered to be leaking information, your employment will be terminated, and the legal consequences will be severe." "I have no friends left to tell," Evelyn said coldly. "Good," Bishop said, unbothered by her bitterness. "And 3, you must never lie to him. Arthur Penhaligon deals in data. He knows the truth before he asks the question. If he asks you something, it is not to find out the answer. It is to see if you have the courage to say it." Bishop turned and began walking again, his heels clicking rhythmically on the slate. "He is waiting for you in the library." They walked down a long hallway lined with art. But it wasn't the kind of art Richard had collected. Boring, impressionist landscapes meant to impress investors. This art was visceral. A Francis Bacon triptych of screaming mouths. A Goya print of titans devouring their children. A massive, jagged sculpture of twisted iron that looked like a car crash frozen in time. Evelyn felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. The man who lived here didn't want to be comforted. He wanted to be unsettled. Bishop stopped in front of a pair of double doors that looked heavy enough to seal a bank vault. He didn't open them. He stepped aside. "Go in," Bishop said. "He is expecting you. I will not accompany you." Evelyn looked at the doors. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her cheap diner clothes. She thought of the courtroom. She thought of the silence. She reached out and pushed the heavy doors open. The library was not a room. It was a cathedral of information. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, lost in shadow. The walls were lined not just with books, but with rows of servers blinking with soft blue lights and glass cases containing strange artifacts, a rusted pistol, a stack of yellowed letters, a torn piece of a flag. But the dominant feature of the room was the far wall. It was a single, seamless sheet of glass, 30 feet wide, overlooking the ocean. The storm outside was raging now, the waves crashing against the cliffs with primal fury. But inside, the silence was absolute. The glass was soundproof. It turned the violence of nature into a silent film. In front of the window, sitting in a high-backed leather chair, was a silhouette. The chair was turned toward the storm. Evelyn could only see the back of the man's head and one hand resting on the armrest. The hand was gripping a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. Evelyn stepped inside, and the heavy doors clicked shut behind her automatically. The sound was final. She walked forward, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the dark hardwood floor. She stopped 10 feet from the chair. She didn't announce herself. Bishop had said he knew she was coming. She waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. The man didn't move. He just watched the storm. Evelyn realized this was the first test. Richard used to make people wait to assert dominance, to make them fidget and apologize for existing. But this didn't feel like a power play. It felt like deep concentration. Evelyn stood perfectly still. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't shift her weight. She breathed shallowly, becoming part of the room's stillness. "Most people cough," a voice said. It was a deep voice, rough at the edges, like gravel rolling over velvet. The chair slowly rotated. Arthur Penhaligon was not what she expected. The tabloids described him as a monster, a recluse with a deformed face or a withered body. He was neither. He was a man in his late 40s, perhaps early 50s. He was strikingly handsome, but in a ravaged way. His face was lined with deep grooves of exhaustion, and his skin was pale from years out of the sun. He had dark hair, greying at the temples, that was slightly too long. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a piercing, unnatural grey, sharp and feverishly intelligent. He was wearing a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a professor who hadn't slept in a week. "Excuse me?" Evelyn said. "Most people," Arthur repeated, looking her up and down with clinical detachment, "cough when they enter a room and I don't acknowledge them. Or they shuffle their feet. They need to make noise to prove they exist. You stood there like a statue." "I learned that making noise usually invites punishment," Evelyn said. The words slipped out before she could check them. Arthur's lips quirked upward, a micro smile. "Yes, the courtroom. I watched the footage." He pressed a button on the armrest of his chair. A massive screen descended from the ceiling, blocking the view of the storm. On the screen, a video began to play. It was her. It was the moment the verdict was read. The camera zoomed in on her face. The pixelated image showed her eyes, wide, shocked, but dry. It showed the moment she closed her mouth, stood up, and turned her back on the judge. Arthur watched the screen. Not her. "Do you know what I saw in that moment, Mrs. Sinclair?" "Defeat," Evelyn whispered. "No," Arthur said sharply. He paused the video on the frame where she was pushing open the courtroom doors. Control. Absolute, terrified control. Richard Sterling wanted a reaction. He spent $3 million on legal fees specifically to buy your tears. And you denied him the purchase. That is a rare quality. The screen retracted into the ceiling. Arthur stood up. He was tall, looming over her. He walked with a slight limp, leaning heavily on a cane she hadn't noticed before, a sleek, black rod topped with silver. He walked to a large mahogany desk in the center of the room and picked up a file. "Richard Sterling," Arthur said, tossing the file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "Real estate mogul, philanthropist, husband of the year, and secretly the man laundering money for the Cartesian cartel through his offshore development projects in Panama." Evelyn froze. The air left her lungs. "What?" "You heard me," Arthur said calmly. He picked up his drink and took a sip. "Your ex-husband isn't just a cheater, Evelyn. He's a criminal, a very high-level, very protected criminal." That's impossible," Evelyn stammered. "I did his books for the foundation. I saw the ledgers." "You saw the ledgers he wanted you to see," Arthur corrected. "You saw the clean money. You didn't see the shadow accounts." "But I have." He moved closer to her, the limp making his approach uneven, rhythmic. Click-step, click-step. "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "Because I need you to confirm it," Arthur said. He stopped 2 feet away from her. He smelled of old paper, scotch, and rain. "You have a memory for details, don't you? Bishop tells me you can recall the exact seating arrangement of a dinner party from 4 years ago. Yes, she admitted. Good. Because the data I have is incomplete. I have the numbers, but I don't have the context. I don't have the names of the men he met for dinner on the 3rd Tuesday of every month. I don't have the dates of his business trips to the Cayman Islands. You do. Evelyn stared at him. The realization washed over her like ice water. This wasn't a job as a librarian. This was an excavation. You want me to help you destroy him, she said. Arthur's grey eyes locked onto hers. The intensity was blinding. I want to destroy the network, Evelyn. Richard is just a loose thread. If we pull him, the whole tapestry unravels. But I can't do it alone. I have the algorithms, but I lack the human element. I lack the witness. He gestured to the room around them. This isn't a library. It's an evidence locker. I have been building a case against the corruption in this city for 20 years. And you are the missing key to the Sterling file. Evelyn looked at the file on the desk. She looked at the man who was offering her a weapon. He destroyed my life, Evelyn said softly. He took my home. He took my name. Then take his freedom, Arthur replied. His voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and dangerous. Work for me. Help me decode the life you lived. We will reconstruct the last 5 years, day by day, transaction by transaction. And when we are done, Richard Sterling won't just be divorced. He will be indicted. He held out his hand. It was a large hand, the fingers long and elegant. I don't need an archivist, Evelyn, Arthur said. I need a partner in crime. Are you in? Evelyn looked at his hand. She thought of the judge. She thought of Beatrix Calloway laughing at her shoes. She thought of the cold, dead silence of the courtroom. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, cool, and electrifying. I'm in, she said. Arthur smiled. This time it wasn't a micro-smile. It was a genuine, terrifying grin. Excellent, he said. Then let's begin. Tell me about the trip to Zurich in 2023. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the glass wall in a flash of blinding white. The storm was just beginning. For the next 6 weeks, Evelyn didn't see the sun. Her world shrank to the dimensions of the strategy room, a windowless bunker beneath the main library of Obsidian Point. The walls were covered in cork and whiteboards. The air was recycled, cool, and smelled faintly of ozone from the server banks humming in the adjacent chamber. This wasn't work. It was a vivisection. Arthur had been right. He didn't need an archivist. He needed a translator. He had terabytes of data, hacked bank records, flight manifests, credit card statements from shell companies. But it was all noise without a melody. Evelyn provided the melody. October 14th, 2024, Arthur said. He was standing at the whiteboard, a marker in hand, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. A transfer of $400,000 to a consulting firm in Cyprus called Blue Horizon. Same day, Richard is listed as being at a golf retreat in Scotland. Evelyn was sitting at the large oak table, surrounded by stacks of her old diaries. She had kept them religiously, a habit from childhood. Richard had never read them. He thought her inner life was too boring to be of interest. She ran her finger down the page, her handwriting shaky from the memory. He wasn't in Scotland, Evelyn said, her voice hollow. October 14th. That was the day of my miscarriage. The marker in Arthur's hand stopped moving. The silence in the room became heavy, pressing against her ears. He told me he had to fly to St. Andrews for a critical merger, Evelyn continued, staring at the paper until the words blurred. He sent flowers, white lilies. I hate lilies. They smell like funerals. He called me from a satellite phone, said the signal was bad. Arthur slowly capped the marker. He turned to look at her. His grey eyes, usually so cold and analytical, held a flicker of something else. Not pity, he knew she would hate that, but a dark, shared anger. "He wasn't in Scotland," Arthur said softly. The IP address for the transfer authorization didn't originate from the UK. It originated from a yacht anchored off the coast of Dubrovnik. Evelyn felt a wave of nausea. Dubrovnik? Who was he with? Arthur tapped a few keys on his tablet. A photo appeared on the main monitor. It was a grainy surveillance shot of a yacht deck. Richard was there, laughing, holding a glass of champagne. Sitting across from him was a man with a thick neck and a scar running through his eyebrow. Viktor Volkov, Arthur identified. Arms dealer, currently sanctioned by 3 different UN councils. Richard wasn't playing golf, Evelyn. He was paying for a shipment of dual-use electronics to be smuggled into a conflict zone. The Blue Horizon consulting fee was the bribe for the Port Authority. Evelyn closed her diary. Her hands were trembling. All those times she had defended him to her friends. All those times she had sat alone in that empty penthouse, convincing herself that his absence was the price of his brilliance, the cost of the lifestyle he provided her. It wasn't brilliance, it was crime. She hadn't been a wife, she had been an alibi. "I feel sick," she whispered. Arthur walked over to the table. He didn't touch her. He respected her space too much for that. Instead, he poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and slid it toward her. "The sickness is good," Arthur said, his voice low and intense. "The sickness means the illusion is dying. You need to let it die, Evelyn. You cannot dissect a body if you are still in love with the patient." "I'm not in love with him," she snapped, looking up. "I hate him." "Good," Arthur said. "Hate is a fuel. Grief is just an anchor." He sat down opposite her. For the first time in weeks he looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were deep bruises. They had been working 18-hour days. "We have the flow of money," Arthur said, rubbing his temples. "We have the connection to Volkov, but it's circumstantial. Any decent lawyer, even that shark Kincaid, could argue Richard was just a passive investor who didn't know what the yacht was used for. We need the smoking gun. We need proof of intent." Evelyn looked at the scattering of photos on the table. Photos of galas, dinners, charity auctions, the glamorous, glossy veneer of her wasted youth. Her eyes landed on a photograph from the Met Gala 2 years ago. She was wearing a vintage Dior gown. Richard was in a tuxedo, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He looked perfect. "The phone," Evelyn said suddenly. Arthur looked up. "What?" "Richard had 2 phones," Evelyn said, the memory sharpening. "He had his work phone, the iPhone everyone saw. But he had another one, a BlackBerry, an old model with physical keys. He kept it in the safe in his study. He told me it was for legacy clients who refused to use encrypted apps." Arthur leaned forward, his predator focus returning instantly. "Did you ever see him use it?" "Only once," Evelyn said. "The night of the gala. We were late. He was frantic. He went into the study and I heard him shouting. When he came out, he looked scared. I'd never seen him scared before. He told me to forget I heard anything." "The BlackBerry," Arthur mused. "If he's still using an old device, it's likely because it's a closed-loop system, hard to hack remotely. But if we could get the physical device—" "It's in the penthouse," Evelyn said. 420 Park Avenue, in the wall safe behind the Modigliani painting. Arthur shook his head. "Impossible. That building is a fortress. Private security, biometric elevators. Even my team couldn't breach it without alerting him." Evelyn stared at the photo of herself in the Dior gown. She looked at the woman she used to be, soft, smiling, oblivious. "You don't need to breach it," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I still have my fingerprint access." "They would have wiped it the day of the verdict," Arthur dismissed. "Richard is arrogant," Evelyn corrected. "He wiped my access to the bank accounts. He wiped my name from the deed. But the elevator biometric system, that's a separate server managed by the building, not him. He's lazy with details he thinks are beneath him. He would assume the building manager did it." Arthur went still. He studied her face, searching for fear, but finding only a cold, crystalline resolve. "It's a suicide mission, Evelyn. If you step into that lobby and the light turns red, security will detain you. Richard will be notified. He will know we are coming." "And if the light turns green?" she asked. "Then you are inside the lion's den with no weapon." Evelyn pushed the photo away. "I lived in that den for 5 years, Arthur. I know where the blind spots are." Arthur stood up and walked to the wall of screens. He stared at the digital map of Manhattan, glowing in the darkness. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, he turned back to her. "We don't go in blind," he said. "If we do this, we do it my way. We need a distraction, a chaos event to keep his eyes off the penthouse." "What kind of distraction?" Arthur smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. "We are going to crash the stock market," he said. Richard Sterling stood at the window of his office on the 40th floor, overlooking Central Park. The view cost him $12 million, but today it offered him no peace. He swirled the ice in his whiskey glass. It was 11:30 a.m. "Explain it to me again," Richard said, his voice deceptively calm. Slowly. Simon Kincaid, the lawyer who had dismantled Evelyn in court, was sitting on the leather sofa. He looked uncomfortable. He was sweating, despite the aggressive air conditioning. "It's a supply chain issue, Richard," Kincaid said, loosening his tie. "3 of your shell companies in the Caymans, the ones holding the assets for the Volkov deal, just got flagged." "Flagged by whom? The IRS?" "No," Kincaid said. "That's the strange part. Not the IRS, not the SEC. They were flagged by the bank's internal compliance algorithm. Someone triggered a deep dive audit. They froze the liquidity. We can't move the money to pay Volkov." Richard turned around. His face was a mask of controlled rage. "Volkov is not a man who accepts technical difficulties as an excuse. If he doesn't get his payment by Friday, he sends people to break my legs. Or worse." "We're trying to trace the trigger," Kincaid stammered. "It looks like a system glitch, or a very sophisticated external query. Someone was poking around the database, asking questions about specific dates." Richard narrowed his eyes. "What dates?" Kincaid hesitated. "October 14th, November 3rd, January 21st. Richard froze. Those weren't random dates. Those were the dates of the shipments, the dates he was supposed to be somewhere else. "Someone knows," Richard whispered. "It could be a coincidence." "There are no coincidences in a billion-dollar ledger," Richard shouted, throwing his glass against the wall. It shattered, amber liquid splashing onto the pristine white carpet. He paced the room, his mind racing. Who knew those dates? Volkov knew, but Volkov wanted his money. He wouldn't freeze it. His accountant? No, the man was too terrified of prison. Then a face floated into his mind, a face he hadn't thought of in months. Evelyn. He dismissed it immediately. Evelyn was a broken woman. He had crushed her. Last he heard, she was waiting tables in some rainy hellhole in Washington state. She barely knew how to use Excel, let alone hack a Cayman Islands bank server. But she knew the dates. She was the one he had lied to on those specific days. "Find her," Richard hissed. Kincaid blinked. "Find who? The hacker?" "Find my ex-wife," Richard commanded. "I want to know exactly where she is, who she is sleeping with, and what she is doing. Right now. Richard, she's nobody. We took everything." "I said find her!" Kincaid scrambled for his phone. "I'll put the private investigators on it. We'll have a location in an hour." Richard leaned both hands on his desk, breathing heavily. The feeling of invincibility he had carried since the trial was cracking. He felt a draft, a cold wind blowing through the cracks of his fortress. Meanwhile, at Obsidian Point, the atmosphere had shifted. The quiet intensity of the library was gone, replaced by a frenetic, military-grade tension. Bishop was moving through the house, checking the perimeter sensors. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that wrapped around the cliffside mansion like a shroud. Evelyn was in her bedroom, staring at the dress laid out on the bed. It wasn't a waitress uniform. It was a black cocktail dress, sleek, expensive, and armored. It was the kind of dress a woman wore to war. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she said. Arthur entered. He was dressed in a tuxedo, the bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck. He held a small velvet box in his hand. "The helicopter is fueling," Arthur said. "We leave in 20 minutes. The distraction is set. At 9:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a massive denial-of-service attack will hit the servers of Sterling Global. His security team will be blinded. That gives you a 15-minute window to enter the penthouse." Evelyn ran her hand over the fabric of the dress. "I'm ready." "Are you?" Arthur asked. He walked over to her. "Going back there. It's going to bring it all back, Evelyn. The smell of the hallway, the sound of the elevator, the ghost of the woman you were. If you hesitate, even for a second, you will be caught." "I won't hesitate," she said. But her hands were shaking. Arthur noticed. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a pair of earrings. Not diamonds, not sapphires. They were simple, rough-cut obsidian stones set in silver, dark, absorbing the light. "Wear these," Arthur said. "What are they?" "They contain a localized audio jammer and a microphone," he explained. "I will be in your ear the entire time, and if anyone tries to scan you for bugs, the obsidian scatters the signal. Also," he paused, his voice softening, "they suit you. Diamonds reflect light. Obsidian survives the fire." Evelyn took the earrings. She put them on, watching herself in the mirror. She didn't look like Claire the waitress anymore. She didn't look like Evelyn Sterling, the victim. She looked like something new, something sharper. "Bishop just got an alert," Arthur said, his tone shifting back to business. "Someone ran a level 4 trace on your old credit cards. Richard is looking for you." Evelyn turned to face him. A cold smile played on her lips. "Let him look," she said. "He's looking for a ghost. He's about to find a monster." "Then let's go," Arthur said, offering his arm. "The jet is waiting. Manhattan awaits its queen." As they walked out of the room, the phone in Arthur's pocket buzzed. He glanced at it. It was a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I see you." Arthur didn't show the message to Evelyn. He slid the phone back into his pocket, his face hardening into stone. The enemy was closer than they thought. The game had just changed from a hunt to a race. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the penthouse foyer. It smelled of white lilies, the funeral flower. Richard hadn't changed a thing. Evelyn stepped onto the marble floor. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her hands were steady. Arthur's voice crackled in her ear, clear and grounding. "The lobby cameras are looped. You have 9 minutes before the override resets. Move." She walked straight to the study. The Modigliani painting hung on the far wall, a portrait of a woman with hollow eyes. Evelyn gripped the frame and swung it aside. There was the safe. She placed her thumb on the scanner. A red light flickered. She held her breath. Beep. Green. The heavy steel door popped open. Richard's arrogance had been his fatal flaw. He never believed she would have the courage to return, so he never bothered to recode the lock. Inside, nestled between stacks of cash and passports, sat the dusty BlackBerry. Evelyn grabbed it. It felt heavy, like holding a grenade. "I expected you'd come for the jewelry," a voice sneered from the doorway. Evelyn froze. She turned slowly. Richard stood there, leaning against the doorframe, a glass of scotch in his hand. He wasn't panicking about the stock market crash. He was smiling. "You think I didn't know?" Richard laughed, stepping into the room. "My system flagged the biometric entry the second you hit the elevator button. The police are already on their way, Evelyn. Breaking and entering? That's 5 years. I'll make sure you serve every day of it." He took a step toward her, his eyes cold and triumphant. "Give me the phone, you're done." Evelyn didn't back away. She didn't tremble. She looked at the man who had reduced her to nothing, and she realized something profound. He was small. "Evelyn," Arthur's voice was calm in her ear. "The trap is sprung. Do it." Evelyn smiled. It was the same smile Arthur had given her in the library. Terrifying and final. "You're right, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "The police are coming, but they aren't coming for me." She held up the BlackBerry. "I didn't just come to steal this. I came to turn it on." She pressed the power button. The screen lit up. "This phone has a GPS tracker linked to the account," Evelyn said. But Arthur didn't just track it. He linked its activation signal directly to the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. The moment this screen lit up, it uploaded your entire chat history with Volkov to a secure server at the Department of Justice. Richard's face went pale. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. You can't," he stammered. "It's already done," Evelyn whispered. Below them, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. Not one siren, dozens. Blue and red lights began to flash against the panoramic windows, painting the room in the colors of emergency. "You took my silence for weakness," Evelyn said, walking past him toward the door. Richard was too stunned to move, staring at the phone in her hand as if it were a viper. But silence is just the sound of a storm gathering. She reached the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors closed, she saw Richard Sterling collapse into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Evelyn walked out of the building just as the FBI tactical team swarmed in. They pushed past her, shouting orders, headed for the penthouse. Across the street, the black Maybach waited. The window rolled down, and Arthur Penhaligon looked out. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. Evelyn slid into the car. She didn't look back at the building. She looked forward into the dark, open road. She had entered the courtroom a victim. She had left the penthouse a legend. The car pulled away, disappearing into the city, leaving nothing behind but the ruin of a bad man and the silence of a debt finally paid. And that is how Evelyn Sinclair turned her tragedy into a weapon. She learned that when the world tries to silence you, you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes you just have to wait for the right moment to strike. Richard Sterling lost his freedom because he underestimated the woman he threw away, proving that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows your secrets and has nothing left to lose. What would you have done in Evelyn's shoes? Would you have taken the money and ran, or would you have stayed for revenge? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and betrayal, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new drama every week. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.